Hello and welcome back to the Fantasy Playmakers. In today's video, I'm going to be doing my first kind of content related to free agency. So I'm basically going to be going through like the top wide receiver free agents in this video, just kind of talking through what I think of them as a player, potential landing spots, whether I think their value will increase or decrease, just kind of get my general thoughts on these players, and then also just the overall wide receiver free agent market, and then just like overall potential landing spots, like teams that are going to be out aggressive looking for wide receivers. And we're kind of in this weird spot with wide receivers and free agency because in the last few seasons, the free agent wide receiver market has crashed pretty badly. So just looking back the last 3 years, so in 2019, the three largest contracts to wide receivers went to Tyrell Williams, Golden Tate, and Adam Humphries. Obviously, those three players have not produced really at all, especially in the last 3 seasons. In 2020, it was Randall Cobb, Emmanuel Sanders, and Robbie Anderson. Pretty rough there also. And then 2021, Kenny Golladay, Corey Davis, and Curtis Samuel. Kenny Golladay just did nothing last year. Corey Davis was solid, but kind of got hurt towards the end of the year. And then Curtis Samuel also did nothing. Keep in mind, this definitely is a stronger class. So I don't think, all of them are just going to be horrible. But I do think teams have kind of understood that you can go out in the draft and bring in a wide receiver who can produce right away, which I think is something that wasn't super common, 5-10 years ago. But I do still have reservations, even though this is a stronger class, about the potential landing spots for these players. I've kind of gone through, looked at all the teams, looked at their wide receiver rooms, and I made some notes about what teams I think are going to be very aggressive towards free agents in free agency or in the draft. Teams that want to go out and bolster that roster spot. And so some of the top teams: Falcons, Bears, Browns, Lions, Texans, Colts, Jaguars, Dolphins, Patriots, Saints, Commanders, Eagles, Packers, Raiders, and Jets. So that was a lot of teams. But if you were kind of, paying attention to those specific teams, not a lot of very encouraging landing spots, a lot of struggling teams, a lot of teams that aren't playoff relevant. And then even the teams that are playoff relevant, not super established quarterbacks. So obviously that's not ideal. If you're a top free agent for fantasy, you would want them to get paired up on a solid offense. Now there are definitely other teams like the Chiefs, Bucks, if they get a quarterback, Chargers, Bills, who could be in the market to bring in like solid wide receiver 2 options, because most of those teams have, stud wide receiver 1s, but there's still a lot of bad landing spots that clearly outweigh the good ones, and typically you'll see those bad teams kind of overpay to bring in these wide receivers. But let's start off, breaking down the wide receivers with the number one guy, Davante Adams. I think, it's pretty clear he is the number one wide receiver free agent, but I would be shocked if he hits the open market. It basically seems like, a guarantee that he is going to get franchise tagged. And so I'm recording this on Friday. This video will probably be out on Monday. And so, maybe Aaron Rodgers makes a decision before then, but right now he has not. And so I think the best case scenario for Davante Adams would be Aaron Rodgers returning to Green Bay. Maybe they play 1 or 2 more seasons together, at least while he's on that franchise tag. The next wide receiver is going to be Chris Godwin from the Bucks. I think he's one of the most versatile and well-rounded wide receivers in the NFL. The past 3 years, he has been fantastic. So 2019, he was the wide receiver 2 in points per game, wide receiver 15 in points per game in 2020, and then the wide receiver 7 in 2021. So just very, very consistent. At his floor, he's a wide receiver 2, but he's also shown the ability to be a high-end wide receiver 1, like we saw in 2019. He is coming off of a season-ending ACL tear, which is honestly kind of a common trend for a lot of these wide receivers entering free agency. If everything breaks right with that injury recovery, I do think he could be back for week 1 of the 2022 season. That may be kind of wishful thinking. Maybe he plays, but he's limited. I think if we're looking at landing spots for Chris Godwin, I'd say probably most likely scenario is him re-signing with the Bucks. We know he likes it in Tampa Bay, but that could also come down to the quarterback position. If Brady was still there, I think this would be a very strong likelihood that he would re-sign. But now that it's kind of up in the air, is it going to be Blaine Gabbert? Is it going to be Kyle Trask? Do they bring in a guy like Deshaun Watson Russell Wilson. All of that is up in the air. But if he doesn't resign with the Bucs, I really feel like he can go anywhere. He can play out wide. He can play in the slot. He's a fantastic blocker. So he really can fit, nearly every scheme in the NFL. Up next, I'm going to be talking about Allen Robinson. And honestly, I'm not super optimistic about A-Rob moving forward. I've seen a lot of people kind of arguing that he's going to bounce back, on a new team. But he completely flopped in 2021. Like, this wasn't just like a down year. He was being drafted as a high-end wide receiver too, and he finished as the wide receiver 83 in points per game. I mean, that is like a historic fall off. In 12 games, he caught 38 passes for 410 yards and one singular touchdown. His highest scoring week, he played in 12 games. The most points he had in one single game was 10.8 PPR points. I mean, you were expecting him to be a lock for that basically every single week as his floor. And obviously, there were a lot of factors that did work against Allen Robinson. The Bears' offense as a whole was just horrible. Coaching staff was not great. But if we look back in years past, I mean, he's produced with Blake Bortles. He's produced with Mitch Trubisky. He's produced with Matt Nagy as the head coach. And he just did nothing this year. I think if he signs on a good team as like the wide receiver 2, I'd be willing to buy back into him as a fantasy asset. But I think if he kind of goes to a team to be the wide receiver 1, on like a bad offense, it would probably be a fade for me. Just because at this point in his career, I'm not sure he has it in him to, basically carry an offense like he has in years past. Next up is going to be Mike Williams, and he is coming off the clear best season of his career. He really thrived in the new role that was given to him by head coach Brandon Staley. He finished as the wide receiver 14 in points per game. I feel like the best case scenario would probably be him returning to the Chargers because they showed in 2021 they know how to use him. He saw volume that he hadn't seen in years past while still being a big play guy. Obviously, he is going to be a touchdown threat, a 50-50 ball player. Plus, he's going to be connected to Justin Herbert, who is one of the very best quarterbacks in the NFL. And if he moves on to a different team, I can't really see him having much higher of a ceiling than he did on the Chargers in 2021. And there's a chance he kind of just flops and returns to mediocrity like he had been, the past few seasons. That may seem a little harsh. He produced, but I just don't know if he's going to have as successful a year as he did in 2021 if he moves on to a different system. The next wide receiver is going to be Odell Beckham Jr., and it really looked like he was going to be a very intriguing free agent option, throughout the entire playoffs up until he tore that ACL. I mean, he was solid when he got traded to the Rams in the regular season, but he was still kind of figuring things out. But he was surging throughout the playoffs. I mean, he was dominant. It looked like he was coming back to, close to former OBJ form. And now it just kind of seems like unlikely that he'll be returning, before late into the 2020 season. So it was a redraft option. I mean, like, he's probably going to be a double-digit round pick just because you're not going to carry him on his bench. And is he going to have, like, wide receiver 1 upside when he returns? I don't really think so. I feel like right now the most likely option is for him to return to the Rams. It definitely seemed like they have a good relationship there. He could take a team-friendly option, kind of go through the rehab process with that organization, and then, hope they make another playoff run, and then he can join them. Now we've got Michael Gallup, who is actually going to be another wide receiver coming off of a torn ACL. There have been rumors coming out recently that the Cowboys do want to retain Michael Gallup, re-sign him either before free agency or when we do actually get to free agency. But for fantasy, I feel like it's probably best for everyone except for Dak Prescott if Gallup moves on to another team. I think he has the skill and ability to be a solid wide receiver 2 in the NFL, even on a pretty good offense. But these past 2 seasons, he's just been stuck behind Amari Cooper and CeeDee Lamb. Obviously that's probably for the best. Those two are both studs, Cooper and Lamb. But when Michael Gallup was the number 2 option in 2019, he caught 66 passes for 1,107 yards and 6 touchdowns in just 14 games. So he totally can do it. Maybe he misses the start of the 2022 season, but I do hope he gets the option to be a top 2 option on a good offense. Now let's shift over to Juju Smith-Schuster, who also had a season-ending injury, and he really started off his career with two just phenomenal seasons, and since then he's just totally fallen off. He took a prove-it deal last offseason to stay with the Steelers. It did not work out. He struggled in the 4 full games he played, and like I mentioned, missed the rest of the regular season before making his return, in their one playoff matchup. I think everyone knows it is clear that he cannot be a wide receiver one. We saw that when Antonio Brown left. He just kind of could not pick up the role that AB left behind. But I do think he can still be a successful number 2 or number 3 option. We know that last offseason, both the Chiefs and Ravens were interested in bringing in Juju Smith-Schuster. We'll see if they're still in the mix, heading into this offseason. I could also see the Buccaneers being a potential fit if Godwin leaves, because Juju can come in, fill that role as a slot receiver, who is also a very good blocker. I think he's actually a really solid fit there if Godwin does move on, but we'll kind of see how it all shakes out. I feel like he'll likely, have a decent amount of options, even if it's not like a long-term offer that he was probably expecting a few years ago. Here's where we kind of start to see the wide receiver market get a little bit thin. I think I'm going to talk about 3 more players. You could argue some of the other free agents should be up here with these guys. I think I chose 10 overall. Kind of tough when you're getting into like 8, 9, 10. But here I have Christian Kirk. And in 4 seasons in the NFL, Kirk has just been a very consistent, reliable option from season to season. In those, 4 years, he has scored between 10.3 and 12.9 points per game per year. So, pretty firmly in that range. I'm not super optimistic that he has like a newfound ceiling, that's much higher than his 12.9 points per game. Like, I don't see him taking a massive leap in 2022 or beyond. He's probably going to just be slotting in as a fantasy wide receiver 3, high-end wide receiver 4 if he gets unlucky, with low-end wide receiver 2 upside, if things break well with touchdowns, stuff like that. Maybe he re-signs with the Cardinals. They've got A.J. Green, who's also a free agent. DeAndre Hopkins is aging. They've got Rondell Moore. But, he's young, but they didn't really use him exceptionally well. So I wonder if they make an effort to retain him as kind of like their number 2 option. Now let's move on to DJ Chark. And I actually think Chark is a really interesting option heading into free agency. He broke out as a sophomore and really looked like a future star, putting up an 1,000-yard, 8-touchdown season. But then he came out disappointed in 2020. He wasn't horrible, but I think people were expecting him to, at least stay the same or take a jump. That didn't really happen. And then in 2021, he fractured his ankle in week 4, missed the rest of the season. I could definitely see him returning here to the Jaguars. He'd have the opportunity to be the wide receiver 1 on this team. Trevor Lawrence should continue to improve. And this could be, an offense that in, 2-3 years is one of the best in the NFL. So, I think, returning to the Jaguars would not be bad. Or if he can be a solid wide receiver 2 on a good offense, maybe like the Chargers, if Mike Williams leaves, something like that. Now on to the final player I'm going to be talking about in this wide receiver free agent video. It is going to be Antonio Brown. And I really don't want to talk about AB, if we're being honest, but I expect him to still be in the headlines. And, heading into the 2022 season, there are going to be fans on contending teams that do want their team to sign him. And there's going to be chatter. It's not going to go away because talent-wise, Antonio Brown is still an elite NFL wide receiver. We've seen it the past 2 seasons. He'd probably be the 3rd best wide receiver in this class behind Davante Adams and Chris Godwin. But I really just cannot see another team committing to Antonio Brown. In the last 3 years, he has shattered his relationship with 4 different franchises. From what we've seen from Antonio Brown, I really think he needs some serious help. So I don't really like talking about, all the things he's done. But just to get like the big picture of his time with the Bucs, I do think it's important to kind of recap it. So he has an 8-game suspension. He's not on a team. Bruce Arians came out early in the season, said, they weren't going to sign him. He's not a fit. That suspension ends, and Brady goes out of his way to vouch for Antonio Brown, to bring him in. The Bucs agree to sign him. They go on to win the Super Bowl. Antonio Brown catches a touchdown. Everything should be great moving forward. They re-sign him to a 1-year deal. If he finishes the 2021 season, he could be set to have a massive contract because of how well he was playing. But then, we know he storms off the field. And if we're just looking at it like this, AB could not make it work with the greatest quarterback and one of the best leaders of all time in Tom Brady. He had a beloved coach in Bruce Arians. I feel like there's this weird hate towards Bruce Arians in like the NFL fan community. Really doesn't make any sense. I mean, he has been a player's coach for a long time. I think it's kind of like all these like clickbait headlines that we saw with like Belichick and Brady. Bruce Arians is beloved by his players. Obviously, it didn't work out there. AB's been trashing him all over the place. The Bucs locker room as a whole is a very, very solid group of high character guys. You have players like Mike Evans and Chris Godwin in that wide receiver room, and AB still could not hold it together. So I really just don't see how he is going to get another opportunity. But obviously, if he signs to some team, even if it's during the season, he's obviously going to be worth picking up because for the few weeks he will play, we know he's an absolute stud on the football field. Unfortunately, just cannot get it together, off the field and apparently now on the field when he's on the sideline. But that is going to wrap it up for my free agent wide receiver kind of recap. I'll be doing this for, I think, the running backs and the tight ends. Don't really think I'm going to do it for the quarterbacks because there's really not many like startable options. Most of those guys are going to be available in trades like Russell Wilson, Deshaun Watson, Aaron Rodgers, stuff like that. But thank you guys for tuning in, and I'll see you in the next one.